Shadiversity.
Greetings, I'm Shad, and I've just watched Letter for the King, or is it Letter to the King? Which is on Netflix, and I have some thoughts to share with you. It's not going to be like the most in-depth crimes against medieval realism video I've done in the past, where we're actually looking at, frame by frame, because that would take way too long, okay? It's actually pretty big, well, when I say big, it's big in comparison. I can turn like half an hour from a movie into like, I don't know, just something really long in a video. So, more broader strokes in this. But it's still, pointing out certain things that they got right and what they didn't and what they got wrong. But overall, I was pleasantly surprised with the execution of Letter to the King, for the King, how they handled the medieval elements. But I will also share my thoughts on, just narrative structure, how good is it overall. So Netflix seems to be pumping out more medieval kind of either period pieces or themed pieces, and I was pleasantly surprised with The Outlaw King. I gave it a glowing review, both in the medieval accuracy elements, but also just the quality of the movie overall. I was underwhelmed by The King. Netflix has a thing with King. Outlaw King, The King, Letter for the King. There must be like the King's Netflix medieval stuff, right? And The Witcher, I was able to enjoy it. It was fun. There was some serious issues and problems with its pacing and writing and things, but Henry Cavill nailed it. And so Netflix seems to be really diving into the whole medieval themed things. And I guess it's what should we expect after the popularity of Game of Thrones? It's almost King. Game of Kings, Thrones, Netflix, and just getting hooked on the King stuff. So with Letter for the King, it is a fantasy. So unlike Outlaw King and the King, they are not restricted so firmly to an actual time, in the medieval period, but it's based on a medieval aesthetic, okay? It's medieval fantasy, and they have some liberties that they can take with that, and so when it comes to fantasy, my judgment is, all right, you can get away with certain liberties now, but what we want to see is functionality, okay? And if you are adopting medieval things, elements, like jousting, for instance, stuff like that, the more accurate or authentic you can make it in a just believable, realistic sense, the more immersive you'll make it, and because you're obviously using the medieval period for something, you want it to feel medieval, and so the more accurate medieval elements you can throw in there, the more medieval there. But there are a lot of holdovers that people get confused to make it feel like medieval fantasy versus history and everything like that. But this is one of the things that Letter for the King did surprisingly well. Like, for one thing, Gambesons, okay? If there's anything to, pique, actually, I think that might be the very thing that, encouraged me to give this series a go. It was in the trailers, and it's like, those are a conspicuously more prominent representation of the good old Gambeson that you generally see in fantasy. Usually fantasy is all leather, but no, it's Gambesons. And so that kind of tipped me off that maybe these people are trying a little bit harder to represent the medieval period a bit better. And so after watching it, I can confirm this is like a Gambeson triumph kind of thing. They love it, and I was love to see it. And even some of the armor, when they did use it, was like, okay, that's functional. It works. I mean, it's not perfect. It's great, but for what it needs to, fulfill, it works. Like, it's got a nice tapered waist. The waistline is actually higher up on the breastplate. In terms of the narrative, I have no idea where on earth they actually got that suit of armor. It just appears out of nowhere. Now he's wearing it, and then he doesn't wear it ever again. That's a full suit of armor. So anyway, right, there are issues like that. But okay, some other things. Choreography with the fight scenes was surprisingly well done. It wasn't brilliant. It wasn't the best in the world, but I don't think I remember seeing any spins. Now, interestingly, one of the more underwhelming fight scenes was actually the last big fight scene where all the characters are kind of getting into that, and it would have been better if they appreciated if they put a bit more effort into that one specifically. But the other fight scenes, it's like, oh, he's keeping a guard up, okay, and he's not overswinging. He's doing tight, precise strikes. Okay, and sometimes they even look, as to how accurate it is, it's not very, but it's functional. Okay, he does this kind of creative disarm. It's like, all right then, there you go. So already this series has gotten some pretty big things done well enough, okay? Not perfect, but so much better than what we've seen. And so if anything that I can kind of classify or judge Letter for the King as is it's a step in the right direction. This is what we want to see. We're not there yet, but we're on our way, which is good. And I'm happy with that. Choreography, some of the way armor was represented. Two other really kind of things that just helped make this, world setting just feel more believable and immersive. The clothing. The clothing was really well done. Those who were generally royalty were wearing fancy, very, medieval, somewhat authentic. I mean, liberties, of course, are taken, but for a fantasy setting, it works perfectly, okay? And look, when people are on the road, they're getting dirty, and the gambesons, even, there are sometimes like surcoats and gambesons, especially children of nobility, probably look a bit more clean and I guess, repaired, maintained, well maintained, that's it. And so, but okay, look, if they're worn or not, they'll get worn down a bit grubby. I can accept that. Yet the overall kind of lighting is always dulled down a little bit, a bit too much to give it look the whole. It looks like a film where it's not actually as bright as what it would be normally in the normal day. So the other thing really impressed me: castles. Of course, the castles. Now. They're limited with budget, so we don't have panning shots. They're usually still shots or slow panning shots. But what we do see of the castles are it's a good castle, okay? And the effects were done really well for those shots specifically. Very photorealistic and immersive, and it's great. I mean, around the castle of the main characters, like where are the farms? But anyway, next part, weapons. Mostly pretty good, okay? The swords, functional, looked like, good swords. There's always the odd one out here and there. It's like, oh, that looks a bit out of, a bit wonky in terms of its weight and stuff. But overall, it's pretty good. And so most of the medieval elements of this series is really a step in the right direction. So, colour me impressed, okay? Now, as to the overall story, it's passable. Some of the characters I ended up enjoying. Okay, the main character still pretty bland and not that enjoyable to go along with, but he has the underdog element going for him. He has the heart of gold. He's a genuinely good person and is trying his hardest, and so you do get one over with him eventually. It takes more than an episode, but okay, it's effective. The other characters seems to be a weakness with a lot of writing, where the auxiliary characters are far more interesting than the main characters. And some of the biggest series in the world kind of fall into that. And I love the Wheel of Time, don't get me wrong. And Rand is actually, I do like Rand, but compared to Matt and Perrin are so much more enjoyable. Sorry, Daniel, I'm talking to Daniel Green, okay, on his channel. Maybe you can respond to me. What do you think is that? That's my hot take, okay? When you do your argument videos, my hot take: Rand is nowhere near as interesting and enjoyable as Matt or Perrin as a main character. Anyway, same kind of thing that's happening with Letter to the King. There's some good twists that happen along the way. It's like, okay, there are some baffling, like, how does this happen narratively, structurally, and stuff. There are some episodes that actually, you get invested in, okay? So good, adventuring action, enjoyable, thrilling stuff does get to happen. And there are some thematic, episodes that suck you in. As to world building, I think the fact that they don't reveal too much about the world building is that probably works in its favor, because as more gets revealed, the more questions you have, and I'm worried that there's just massive plot holes in regards to the magic. You don't know how the magic works, in all honesty, and the magic is ultimately used towards the end of the series, and it is so blandly just typical, that there was nothing inventive or creative. It was just magic is doing what you expect magic to do and you don't know why, there's no explanation, and you don't know what's going on with the bad guy, why he can do what he can do. And so the magic is very soft in terms of the rules that it tries to set up, but it's not specific enough about what it's doing that it contradicts itself in those rules. So the vagueness of its world building avoids massive contradictions because of that. And ultimately what's interesting, it's not really a spoiler, I'm being very vague here, but it's not the final conclusive kind of thing that the main character gets invested in towards the conclusion. So the failure in how magic is used towards the end is kind of answered, but it does raise some pretty big questions about what's going on with the main character and how the magic is interacting with him. And when I say there was some good twists, there was like two specifically, and separate to those twists, there was a kind of character arc on one of the, side characters that I really enjoyed as well. And there's specifically two characters have their own very specific kind of contrasting arcs that they go on, both being more interesting than the main character. And one of them particularly I enjoyed quite a bit, and the character I was enjoying as well. So the other thing is, like, it doesn't do anything new, inventive in regards to general fantasy storytelling. Very, very much run-of-the-mill chosen one kind of story with a bit of a twist. And the twist, you might say, no, twists like that are pretty run-of-the-mill as well. Not saying what it is, I can just tell you there is a twist. It's not a spoiler. So because of that, it's stock standard in regards to its story, with some little gems here and there that you can enjoy more often, which unfortunately gets counterbalanced by some of the big holes in its storytelling. Like, there's one point where the characters need to get from point A to point B, and they're taking ages, but an antagonist who was in the same location where they were gets there instantly, like the next scene, and you're like, how did they get there so quick? The other characters are taking their sweet time forever to get there, but they're instantly. What? Right? So it has those types of issues, which means it's not perfect, and it brings the gems a bit more, so I can't really upvote it because of that. But overall, I'd probably give it, well, it's funny, when you give ratings out of 10, I've learned recently that some people, like, a 5 is equivalent to a 0, and they'll never go underneath a 5. And I was like, what? I mean, when I give something a 5, it's like, that means right in the middle, average. It's an average thing. Average, yeah, and 6 is above average, but there are some people, so that's the context of my rating, how I rate from 1 to 10. And because some people think, oh, no, a 5 is equivalent to a 0, weird, right? But anyway, so I would give it maybe a 6. Yeah, maybe a 6. It could get pushed to a 7 if the issues weren't there and some of the good parts were. But then, having said that, the execution of the medieval elements encouraged me to maybe push it to a 7, because I did actually get immersed in the world. The visual, depiction and presentation of the world was very authentically medieval fantasy. The inaccuracies in terms of historical periods and stuff, the anachronisms, perfectly fine to fit into a fantasy setting like this, and so that encourages me to push it to a 7. And 7 is a pretty high rating. I gave The Witcher a 7. And the writing is more consistent in Letter for the King than The Witcher, okay? The Witcher has some massive, and I mean massive, inconsistencies with its writing, like, watch my reviews. So, interesting, if you enjoy The Witcher, but see, the characters are better in The Witcher, okay? And they're more pronounced, more enjoyable, and, like, Henry Cavill nails it, which is why I'd probably still give Witcher a higher rating. So maybe this is a 6.5. Instead of a full 7. But that's my thoughts on Letters for the King. And as I mentioned from the beginning, step in the right direction. There are very specific things that this deserves to be praised for and encouraged for other, shows that are doing medieval fantasy as well. Have you seen Letter for the King? What did you think of it? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. I look forward to reading them. And of course, I look forward to seeing you in the next video. So until that time, farewell.